Perfect. Great. So, Bore da, welcome everybody. I'm Amy Nicholas. I'm the Project Officer for the Transport and Health Integrated Research Network, also known as THINK. And I'm welcoming you today to the Introduction to Co-Production and Citizen Involvement workshop with the Co-Production Lab Wales, and Mike's going to be running that for you in just a moment. So I know some of you are already engaged members of THINK, but for those of you who are not, just a bit of a background. So THINK is a collaboration between the Psychology Department of Aberystwyth University and Public Health Wales. So we have a co-director in each of those organisations. And we are funded by Health and Care Research Wales, which is itself funded by the Welsh Government. And what we're trying to do is to integrate transport and health research better at an academic level, but also opening up those kind of discussions and collaboration opportunities to professionals working in both transport organisations and health organisations who typically don't really talk to each other. So the aspiration then is that there'll be better health and environment outcomes for everybody as a result of that more collaborative, integrated working. A big part of that story is also including the public in how those kind of health and transport services are designed and provided. So that's why we've, as THINK, started our own co-production journey, and we invite you to come along with us, which is why we've invited Mike to come along and give you the training today. So for those of you who aren't already members of THINK and have found out about this event through a colleague or somewhere else, then I do encourage you to join up to THINK. It's completely free. I'll send you a link around after the event. It just means that you can be up to date with research that's coming out and other events. The next one we've got is on the 7th of June, and that is a systems mapping exercise looking at all the different aspects of how we can make active travel more accessible for everybody. So as a result of this event today, some of you might feel inspired to take part in that as well. So I think that's it from me. I will now hand over to Mike. Thanks very much. Enjoy your session.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone. So as Amy said, my name's Mike. I work with Co-Production Lab Wales, and as the name suggests, we're interested in all things co-production. And that's going to be our topic of conversation for an hour and a half this morning. We'll be finished just before midday. So if you've got anywhere to be at 12, don't worry, I'm going to keep a close eye on the time. One thing I want to say right at the beginning is I'm always mindful of being realistic about how much we can achieve in 90 minutes. I don't think we can all answer every question. We can't all become experts in 90 minutes. What we can do is have a brilliant conversation that allows us to ask better questions, understand the picture more clearly, hopefully feel motivated for the journey ahead. And that's going to be the plan this morning. We're going to reflect on what co-production is, on when co-production can deliver value for ourselves, for our communities, for everyone, on why we should want to co-produce various aspects of our work, and critically how we can then go about it. At each of those steps, we'll look at a little bit of theory, a little bit of practice, and probably more importantly, we'll have a good chat to share some of our ideas, experiences, challenges, and opportunities. And we'll see where that takes us to by the middle of the day today. Just before we get going, I'm mindful that you may all not know one another. I don't think I've met any of you before. And there's going to be lots of discussion amongst us today. If we were doing this in person, this is what we would have done when we were all pouring a coffee before we sat down. So we're going to have just a 2-minute quick fire round where I'm going to invite each of you, if you're able to, just to briefly say who you are, what your role is, and where in the world you are today. I'll endeavour not to get completely confused as we do this. I'm going to come to you first, if I may, Marco.
I'm still video for a second. I'm Marco. I'm a lecturer at Aberystwyth University. I'm focusing on sort of healthy aging and physical activity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marco. And Alice, may I come to you next?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Alice. I'm a behavioural scientist working in the behavioural science unit here in Wales, but I'm actually based in Gloucestershire.
Awesome. Thank you, Alice. And next, may I come to you, Alison?
Hi there. I'm chair of an environmental group in Llanfyllin in mid Wales. We run projects to reduce carbon emissions and make life more sustainable. And I'm also a member of the Lib Dems and do lots of research for them. So very interested politically in co-production.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alison. You're in my neck of the woods too. So beautiful part of the world. Anne, can I come to you next, please?
Hi, I work in Bangor University and I'm particularly interested in mental health research. So there's a lot of opportunities for co-production, and I've been involved in some projects, including people with lived experience, but there are also always lots of challenges. So I'm hoping to hear some different solutions and different experiences from people today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anne. And yeah, I hope so too. I think that's exactly why we're all here. Ben, may I come to you next, please?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm a research fellow at Oxford Brookes University with an interest in healthy aging and mobility.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. And Catherine, if I could come to you next.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm person-centred care lead for cancer for BETSI, BCUHB, and I'm sort of pan BETSI right across North Wales. So I'm just fell across this actually and thought this looks really interesting. I'm going to come along and learn what I can, because we're looking at how we can sort of involve patients more, right, with co-production with our services and so forth. So thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you, Catherine. And Claire, if I could come to you next.
Hi, yeah, I'm Claire. I'm a Research and Development Officer for Rural Health and Care Wales, and I'm based in Aberystwyth.
Thank you, Claire. And Sian, if I could come to you next.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everybody. I'm Sian Cox. I'm a councillor on Powys County Council, and I'm the cabinet member for adult social care. But I've also had several years now as a community activist, and I'm just driven by the belief that we all need to be collaborating together. That decisions shouldn't be getting made by small numbers of people with professional expertise or political expertise behind closed doors. I think that citizens have to absolutely be involved at the decision-making tables from the very beginning, and we need to facilitate, as authorities, we need to facilitate settings in which they become informed, fully informed from expert delivery, but also from each other, from the expertise and the experience that citizens bring to the table from the very beginning. I think co-production is just the way that political decision making needs to happen, and I want to do anything I can to make that happen.
Amen. Thank you, Sian. Ellie, if I could come to you next.
Hi. I'm a member of Ceredigion Green Party. I've been actively involved in improving public transport for many years, was a member of the Public Transport Users Committee, which advised the Welsh Government to see things from a passenger's point of view. So I'm keen to find out how I can use today to improve my campaigning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ellie. And Emma, if I could come to you next.
Morning. I'm Emma. I'm the Development Officer for South Wales for the Community Transport Association.
Thank you, Emma. And Gwenda, if I could come to you next.
I've got new headphones. I don't know if they work or not. I'm Gwenda. I work for Cycling UK, formerly the Cyclist Touring Club, CTC, and I'm particularly interested in this because one of the aspects of my role is working with campaigners across Wales to help them influence change at a local authority level. And I think there are real benefits, as I think Sian said, about, we get the right decisions if we involve the right people in coming up with solutions. So yeah, I'm very keen that we do that with cycling, active travel in particular.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gwenda. And over to you, Helen.
Hi, I'm Helen Griffiths, Senior Road Safety Officer at Neath Talbot Council. Obviously, we've got a remit of education, training and publicity, and the last few years have obviously had a massive change with active travel and promoting as part of our cycling and walking training.
Thank you, Helen. And Katie, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie. I'm a research assistant and PhD student at Swansea University.
Thanks, Katie. And Lucy.
Good morning. I am a researcher in transport mobility. I work with Amy in Aberystwyth University from the Think Transport and Health Research Network.
Great, thank you, Lucy. And Madeline, if I could come to you next.
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Madeline Goodson. I've just recently joined Transport for Wales as a bus transformation project manager. So really interested in how we can sort of reform the network and really deliver social value in the process of doing that.
Brilliant, thank you, Madeline. And Michelle.
Morning, everybody. I'm Michelle. I'm Development Officer for North Wales for Community Transport Association, and I'm based in Oswestry, Shropshire.
Thanks, Michelle. And Naledi, if I could come to you next.
Hi, everyone. And my name is Naledi. I'm a research fellow at Cardiff University. I'm actually in cancer research, but I'm interested in the introduction to co-production element because I have to incorporate that with patient involvement in my research. So I thought this would be a good way, even though I'm not in transport, but I just wanted to kind of have the fundamentals in the course.
Super, thank you. And Ruth, over to you.
Hello. Hello, I'm Ruth Stafford. I work for Sustrans and I'm based in Newtown, so not too far from Alison and Michelle. And Alison, hello, I'm Adam Kennelly's partner. Hello. So yes, I have been working for Sustrans for 2 years in September, and I'm just trying to get people to walk and cycle more in Newtown, which is Mid Wales. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. You've reminded me that I owe Adam an email as well. I'll do that. Sharon, over to you.
Morning, everyone. I'm a senior lecturer in public health and wellbeing at Wrexham Glyndŵr University, and really interested in co-production in order to benefit research and the development of health improvement and promotion interventions and strategies.
Cool. I'm a fellow in visiting researcher at Glyndŵr. So lovely to see you here, flying the flag. Sue, over to you.
Hi, I'm Sue. So I support impact and knowledge exchange at Aberystwyth University, and co-production is part of that and forms the basis. So I'm here to learn more about co-production.
Thank you, Sue. Richard, over to you.
I'm a senior research fellow at the University of Southern Lancashire. I'm interested in active mobility, although I'm based in sunny Cheshire, so I'm not so far as Preston from you all.
Thank you, Richard. And John, if I could come to you next.
Find mute, I'm used to Teams. Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan West. I'm head of behavioural science at Behavioural Science Unit in Public Health Wales, and I'm interested in co-production. I've been interested in it for a long time actually, but interested in relation to developing behaviour change interventions, but also in systems approaches. So we do things like behavioural systems mapping or systems mapping in systems approaches, and really interested in how better to involve our target audience, our public.
Wonderful, thank you, John. And if my maths is correct, last but not least, may I come to you, Tracy?
Yeah, sorry. Hi everyone. Sorry I was late joining. I'm Tracy Kearns. I'm the Programme Manager for Rural and Bus at Transport for Wales, and I know absolutely nothing about co-production, so I'm going to learn lots today. I'm really glad to be here.
Wonderful. Well, you've come to the right place, and thank you for that, everybody. I appreciate it's a little indulgent to sort of spend time doing that, but equally, co-production is about nothing if not relationships. We're here to learn together, and I always find it so much easier to share and learn with people who you've seen smile, say hello, say who they are. We're not strangers anymore, and it's going to bode well. One little warm-up question for us all before we dive into some theory. I'd invite you all just to do this into the chat if you're able to. If you were put on the spot and said, how would you define co-production in a sentence? What would your sentence be? I'll give you all just a few moments to reflect. There's obviously no right answers here, Once you've written your sentence, feel free to share it. And for the benefit of those watching this recording, I'll read them out as they come through. What's your one sentence definition of co-production? And as you're reflecting and typing, I'll reassure you with the caveat that there is no internationally accepted definition of co-production. So I'm curious to see how we would all personally explain and define it. Co-production is involving the public in making the changes that will impact them. Co-production is creating something that has taken account of all the voices in the room, working together towards a similar aim. Professionals and the public designing services together. Co-production is involving all of those interested, working together to achieve our mutual aims and goals, working with the public and other organisations to encourage engagement and involvement, working together for a positive outcome. Lots of agreement here and all good stuff. Co-production is involving all stakeholders in developing something throughout the process. Equal collaboration with members of the public at every level to achieve a shared aim. Hearing all the voices, cooperating with people from different bodies, not making decisions in silos, listening to the public first and foremost. What this already tells me is that we already have a decent sense of what co-production is about in the room. Working with the public and other stakeholders to design and deliver interventions, to engage and improve health in their communities, to ensure that everyone is involved with creating solutions, facilitating and meaningfully drawing upon relationships, different voices being heard and sharing power. Co-production is the coming together of professionals and ordinary people to make decisions, develop ideas, agree plans, implement actions as absolute equals, recognizing the range of different kinds of experience and expertise and valuing no one above another. I can't put it better than you are. And we already know all of the important stuff, and that's clear. The next hour and 10 minutes are going to be the fine details of how we take these sentiments and turn them into practical deliverable actions in our work. I'll share my slides for a moment now and bring some definitions and some ideas that can help us create this framework for action, but acknowledging that you already know the important stuff. So let's start with that what, as I promised. So what is co-production? Well, as I said, there is no universally accepted definition, but there are plenty of widely accepted and very similar definitions which have a strong commonality of values with each other and with everything you've just shared. So firstly, something I wanted to share with you just to kick off is a quote from Edgar Kahn. One thing all of these modern definitions of co-production have in common, and one thing that the way co-production and involvement are discussed in Welsh legislation has in common with them too, is they have a direct provenance in the work of Edgar Kahn, creator of time banking, author of the co-production imperative, a big fan of Wales. Edgar Kahn passed away in recent years, but around 10 years ago when he was in Wales speaking at a co-production event, he said, "You have here in Wales, in co-production, a national treasure. It's not just that Wales is first amongst equals, it's number one globally." I think sometimes when we're in the thick of it, we can get drawn into the things which could be better, the things we're not doing so well, the things which challenge and frustrate us. But the eyes of the world are on Wales, and we are doing some great work here, and it's special. And that's the platform on which we're building, and we should not let ourselves forget it. To answer your question, Sian, this was an event. I will share these slides after today, and I've included the recording that this quote is taken from at the back of those slides. It was a Co-Production Network for Wales event, I think in 2010. It is on YouTube. And our definition of co-production as the Co-Production Lab for Wales, associated with the Co-Production Network for Wales, is as follows: that co-production of public services means that the people who provide and the people who deliver services and the people who access and receive services share power and responsibility and work together for mutual benefit in equal, reciprocal, and caring relationships. Again, strong synergy with the sentiments you've shared. And some things to hone in on. Well, we're talking about those who provide and those who receive services. But the power balance is one of absolute equity and equality. The people who provide and the people who access and receive services sharing power and responsibility, working together for mutual benefit. It benefits those who provide, it benefits those who receive, in equal, reciprocal and caring relationships. If any words jumps out at me in that definition, it's always caring. One can imagine how is sharing being done under duress, transactionally. For me, that's not co-production, that's smoke and mirrors. The thing which really is the marker of true co-production is that they are real relationships. It's a caring relationship where we value and acknowledge the inherent worth of the individual. You matter, and that is why I want to involve you and share my power with you. So when we care, good things start to follow. That's not the rocket science, but that's the nub of what we're talking about when we talk about co-production. Everyone has a worth, everyone has a value. How can we make the way we design and deliver our public services reflect that universal truth? To delineate and differentiate co-production from other equally critical practices in public service, the yellow blob over on the right there shows that organizations can and should collaborate. Think is a good example of organizations coming together and collaborating. If we work in partnership, organization to organization, we can do more with less, with better outcomes for all. Partnership is brilliant and to be encouraged, but it's different to co-production. The blue blob over on the left demonstrates that citizens can do plenty of things without their public service providers getting involved. Grassroots, community-led action, communities doing things for themselves. It's critical, it's important, it always has a role to play, it should be supported and encouraged, but it's distinct from co-production in the context we're talking about it today. When we talk about co-production, we talk about the coming together of those organizations and those citizens, the people and the professionals, as equals to do more together than they could in their silos. And for those of you operating in the public sector in Wales, and we'll come back to this later, but where the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act talks about involvement, it's a very close relative of co-production. It is this sense of those who provide and make the decisions coming together with those who receive the service and feel the brunt of those decisions, making those decisions collectively and working with each other every step of the way. And for me, these 5 values are the things which are like our bird spotter's guide for co-production. The academic definition is useful, but really co-production is one of those things where the true answer is, well, you'll kind of know it when you feel it. Co-production is marked by these things, and if you see them out there in the wild to a greater or lesser extent, you're probably experiencing co-production in action. So the first of these 5 values, and again, if you're looking for the provenance of these, it's in Edgar Cahn's work, The Co-Production Imperative. The first of these values is that we should value all participants and build on their strengths. Edgar Cahn talked about the non-market economy, the fact that we have a society dominated by money, and money values things that are scarce and things that are in demand. Kindness and compassion aren't scarce, and the more of them we deliver, the more of them we create. We need to acknowledge and bring that into our system. Everybody has a worth. Everybody has a value. Everybody has something to offer. And if we can acknowledge that and build upon that, there is no end to what we can achieve. My colleague Noreen loves a good slogan, and she often says, we should focus on what's strong, not on what's wrong. It's an asset-based approach. Let's build on the strengths within our communities. Not ignoring the problems, but not getting hung up on the deficits, a strengths-based approach. Secondly, it's about developing networks across silos. I appreciate, as part of this network, I'm very much preaching to the choir. My crude rule of thumb in public service design is that If someone has to go to 2 different places for a solution they should have been able to get by going to one, there is scope for our service design to improve. If we can think of the picture holistically, if we can join the dots, if we can be connectors, if we can treat problems and challenges and opportunities in the round, then we will do better by our communities than if we keep things siloed and distinct and disconnected. Thirdly, it's about doing what matters for everyone who's involved. Again, my crude rule of thumb here is that if somebody has to conform and compromise so they can follow my process, then my process has room for improvement. My process should be able to compromise and conform to meet the diverse needs of my community. And so doing what matters for the people involved means we shouldn't get hung up and bogged down and falsely focused on our systems and processes. Our systems and processes exist to enable positive outcomes for our communities, and focus on that success, on what matters to people, on how we can make things better for them in a way which is meaningful and relevant to them, is what public service is about. And we need that inherent flexibility to be able to deliver that. Fourthly, it's about building relationships of trust, where we can share power. This is why that caring is so critical to me from that definition. If co-production is about sharing power and responsibility, I would argue we can't share power and responsibility with people who we don't trust. We can't trust people who we don't know. And we can't know people if we haven't spent the time to get to know them, to build that relationship. We all know this intuitively, instinctively with our children, our parents, our friends, our families, but it can be designed out of our public services under resource pressure, under pressure to meet targets, under those other constraints and weights that we have to bear. The time it takes to sit down with people, talk to them, get to know them, hear their stories, empathize with them, make them feel valued, make them feel respected, is the cornerstone of everything else. We design it out of our systems at our peril. Again, my colleague Noreen's rule of thumb is never come to a meeting without a pack of biscuits or a slice of cake. Little details really, really matter. And fifth and finally, co-production is about the fact that people can be change makers and organizations can become enablers. This will lead us on to our first topic for discussion in a moment. In public service, we can almost sure point to plenty of examples where we are doing things for people. Our paternal instinct comes in of, we can see a problem in this community and it's on us to come in with the answer and fix it for them. And if we fix it quickly and efficiently, we've done a great job. Whereas actually that approach, while sometimes appropriate, in other places can entrench dependency, it can disempower, it can pull communities further away from the solution. And sometimes it's a short-term, impractical solution. Whereas if we'd enabled a community to design and deliver a solution of their own, it would have been a long-term sustainable solution. And so our role in public service is often an enabling role. How can we work with people to co-produce solutions which will lead to lasting, sustainable change? For those people who are disempowered, who have the least control, the least sense of self-efficacy, the opportunity to make and deliver a change in their own life is an incredibly rare gift. And often the greatest gift we can give to anyone is to say, you have the power, you have the control. The way your life is going to change is now down to you with our support. Not a burden, but an opportunity. So these 5 things in the wild, like I say, are my bird spotter's guide to co-production. If we see these things happening, co-production is happening to some extent. If these things are absent from our work, there is more work for us to do. We should be valuing everyone and building on their strengths, joining the dots and developing networks, focusing on the outcomes and what matters for people, investing in building real relationships and enabling long-term sustainable change to be delivered with our communities. So let's move this now into some practical examples that we can reflect on together. So again, one way this is sometimes framed, and you may well have seen this, is as a ladder of participation. developed from the work of Sherry Arnstein, where Sherry Arnstein's ladder took you from manipulation and non-participation through to citizen power and citizen control. Translating that, and again, the figure on the right is from Think Local Act Personal as a ladder of co-production, where we may see coercion as the lowest rung of our ladder, through to co-production at the upper echelons at the top. Now, as the co-production lab for Wales, we would argue there is a different but equal way to think about this. A ladder implies low rungs bad, top rungs good. But in reality, of course, we know there are plenty of instances where coercion and protection are desirable and where co-production wouldn't be the right fit. So in many ways, it is more helpful to think of this as a spectrum of engagement, a spectrum of interactions, the many different ways in which those who provide and those who receive services can work together, all appropriate in their own contexts. So to introduce each in turn, over on the left, we can say there are places where we should do things to people, coerce them, protect them, persuade them. If you've been in your car lately, I'm sure there are places where you have to drive at 20, at 30, at 60. And you can't just make that decision. It's been done for you. It's been done to protect you. It's been done to protect those around you on their bikes, crossing the roads, driving past. So some things are done to us for our safety, for the safety of others, and it's good that they are. If I have a heart attack, I'll be rushed into hospital and my life hopefully will be saved. It'll be coercion, it'll be protection done to me. In the middle of this diagram, we see the realm of doing things for, where those in public service deliver things for and on behalf of their communities. It can be around providing information about what's going on, what's being delivered. Very often, it's about consultation. We want our communities to give us feedback and data and insight. We will reflect on that and we will make a decision based upon it. And it can even be participation. Let's have a focus group. Let's have a drop-in event. Let's have a community workshop. The marker of doing for is who makes the final decision. If I still make it as the public service provider, I am still doing things for people, no matter how much involvement and participation they may have had to help me make that decision. However, on the right, we see the realm where that decision is no longer made just by me. It is a genuine collective decision by me in public service and all those who receive that service. This is where co-production and involvement come into the fold. And we can put some statements around these to help us locate our own practices. So if we're coercing and protecting, we may reflect on the statement and it may resonate with us to say we have a duty to act to ensure people's safety. We know what people need to do. We need to get them to do it. If that relates to you, then maybe doing to is the appropriate way of engaging in a particular place. When it comes to doing for, we might say we provide information when, where, and how people need it. We decide on the questions to ask, and we decide how to collect data to inform those decisions. We listen to people's lived experiences and it informs our decisions. If those statements resonate with you, maybe you're doing things for people. And when it comes to co-production, we say we listen to people's experiences and we share our experiences. It's reciprocal and it's two-way. There is equal power in decision-making, and we value different experiences. If that resonates with you, that's where the co-production needs to happen. Co-production needs to happen where the organization and the people listen to each other, the organization and the people make the decisions together, and the organization and the people take action away. Not only shared power, but shared responsibility. We make the decision together, we do it together. So that's a long-winded introduction from me that I want to put into a open discussion for us for the next 10 minutes or so now, with some real examples. So I've just got a couple of case studies here. I'm going to read through each in turn, appreciating the text might be quite small on your screen. And then I'm simply going to invite you to reflect on where on our spectrum of engagement does this example live? Is it an example of doing to, doing for, doing with, or is it a bit of a mix? So real examples, I'll read this out for everybody now. So starting in 2020, Cardiff City Council used a crowdsourcing map where people were invited, where people identified local issues relating to active travel. And in summer 2021, this was followed by a consultation on specific route improvements in 32 locations. Consultation was created to fulfil the council's duties under the Active Travel Wales Act. The council asked its residents and visitors to help confirm if they had identified the correct routes for improvement and whether the proposals were appropriate for developing the routes. And the 2 linked consultations brought in over 20,000 responses, and nearly 1,200 people have subscribed to receive project updates. If you want to know what a crowdsourcing map looks like, it's this. So people were able to interact with something akin to a Google map and leave real comments on real bits of the map. I'll click on the real map to show you now, actually. So I shall stop sharing my screen just for one moment, and I'll come back and show you what this interactive map looks like. Voila. And so you can zoom out and you can see who's left comments where. You can zoom in and see very specifically what people might be saying about elements of active travel routes. So on the Atlantic Wharf, we can see this person said there is no path lighting outside the newly built flats, so it's practically pitch black when walking around at night. There is raised and loose brickwork on numerous sections around the wharf, which can be a tripping hazard. So fine-grained detail, any individual can put their pin in the map and feedback. The colours the colours are ones that the respondents could select to reflect their sentiment. Are they very satisfied, very dissatisfied, or somewhere in the middle? And at scale, a huge rich data set is created. I'm going to stop sharing just for the moment. Would anyone like to suggest, either by shouting out, raising your hand, or writing into the chat, whether you think we're looking at an example of co-production, or is this something else? Are we doing to, doing for, or doing with? Gwenda, I shall come to you first. Oh, you're still muted for us, Gwenda.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, it's not co-production. It's consultation, because I think, yeah, it was a different way of doing consultation, and I think it was an attempt during COVID to do consultation in a more effective way, but there has been no co-production of solutions, and this, in effect, I know because I've worked on this, in different ways, but the amount of data meant that the local authority probably struggled to actually deal with it all. So you questioned as well, you gather lots of data, but if you don't have capacity to do something positive with it, then some people find it more frustrating than anything. So
something which thank you, Gwenda. There's plenty of agreement for that in the chat too. Something I often try and hold as a mantra, and certainly advise those I work with to hold as a mantra, is don't ask questions if you're not really interested in the answers. So I think you're quite right. It's an incredibly rich source of data where you can see people saying that cobblestone is loose in an active travel consultation. But unless a way of dealing with that level of data has been reflected on and planned in, you then run the risk of causing frustrations by asking the question and ignoring the answer. So there's an element of careful what you wish for, I suppose, unless the whole journey is planned out from the beginning. Sian, if I may come to you, you suggested in the chat you would see this as doing with, a good example of participation. Would you like to share any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sorry, I said doing with by mistake. It's doing for, it's the middle section, isn't it? And I might be wrong about that. I thought that if it had just been the initial consultation, I'd have said just consultation, but because there was that extra element of people being invited to comment on whether their original ideas had been, I mean, we didn't have that much information about how rich and deep it was.
No, I've given it
I suppose I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt and thinking, well, they've asked the second round of questions around how well have we got this right? So it's definitely not co-production, because as you say, for me, co-production would be bringing them around the decision-making, the table from the start, and designing the questions to be asked in the first place, you know, so from the very beginning. But I did think it was very good consultation, but maybe it was good enough to be over into participation, assuming that that second vein of interaction was meaningful, and what people said about how right or not the council had got it was acted on. So for me, it's about, is it acted on? Do we assume that these answers are the right answers? I mean, and part of it, the thing that I think where we fall down with consultation is we're just asking generally for people to give the opinions they've already got. We're not providing an opportunity for people to come together and refine and hone those opinions in interaction with other people. And that's what stops it being co-production for me as well, where that facility has not been a part of the process from the beginning. Sorry, I'm banging on.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Sian. And I agree with all of those sentiments. And I should stress, of course, for the context with this, that I share this as a brief example to prompt us and get us talking. Not as an example of the best or the worst practice, just an example we can talk around. And as you say, I think all of those sentiments are right, that this is clearly an interesting, creative, good consultation. We don't have all of the information at our disposal, as some people have said in the chat, to make that fully informed decision, but we can already suggest what else we would want to expect or see if this was to become co-production. As has been said by John in the chat, it's sort of, there's not quite enough info to say. And as Lucy said, it kind of depends on what happens next. Who owns the decision, to go back to that previous slide? Are we inviting people's responses to take them away, process them and decide? Or are we using these tools as a way to collectively come up with mutual decisions between those who provide and those who receive the service? I think one lesson for us in this, and it's not to say good or bad, but just not to confuse, but don't confuse very glossy consultation for co-production. Sometimes glossy consultation is exactly what we need, and it can be brilliant, but we shouldn't confuse it for co-production. Co-production isn't about how shiny it is, it's about who owns the decision. Let's look at a completely different example now, though. I'll take one from another country, in fact, just to hopefully take us all totally out of our comfort zone and context. And again, I shall share my screen so I can read this out to you all. So this time we're going to reflect on an inclusive co-design workshop, which was run in Pittsburgh, USA in 2018. With the goal of bringing employers, residents and technologists together to build actionable solutions to get everyone moving. The two-day workshop attracted nearly 200 attendees, 1/5 of whom were low mobility residents whose employability had suffered as a direct result of this low mobility. Low mobility was for a whole range of factors. To give some additional context, from lack of money to access public transport services due to, as well as physical impairments preventing people from leaving the house. So attendees worked in cross-functional teams to generate 20 transportation design solutions, which passed through pressure testing from other attendees and subject matter experts to be presented at the conclusion of day 2. Several of these solutions went on to secure funding to be piloted, and one of these solutions secured $50,000 of investment by winning Pittsburgh's City of Tomorrow Challenge and beat over 125 other proposals from the area. I'm going to play a very brief video clip now, which gives you a sense of what the event actually looked like in practice. So I'll share the video and the audio should start playing automatically too.
Mobility is more than just transportation. It's the story of access. But for many vulnerable communities, a lack of access often leads to roadblocks in employment, health, and self-sufficiency. Employers also struggle with mobility, The cost to recruit and retain a workforce without reliable transportation access amounts to thousands of dollars wasted per position per year. For the first time, technology companies, employers, and local government sat down at the table with impacted residents to design corporate-funded mobility pilots that can sustainably complement a city's infrastructure and strengthen the regional workforce. The City of Pittsburgh and Boston Consulting Group saw the opportunity to connect these labor shortage challenges with local residents' mobility struggles in order to prove the ROI of direct employer investment in transit solutions. The 200 attendees at Mobility created 20 pilot prototypes during the two-day event, setting the stage for public trials that aim to deliver holistic benefit across the region and prove that the time has come to embrace public-private partnerships and human-centered design in city planning.
Again, acknowledging we only have very limited information at our disposal, what are people's immediate responses to what we've just seen and heard? Are we looking at something closer to doing with, doing for, or doing to? So I can see in the chat, Sean saying this feels like co-production, doing with. Sue saying it's designed for the participation. The problem or issue was already identified. And for Rowena, this is doing with. Again, for you, John, this feels like doing with. It feels more like participatory co-production. Just before we move on then, and again, these are simple examples just to get us talking as much as anything. I want everyone to reflect on what's different about this one compared to the last one, where we have more widths than fours this time, and we had more fours than widths last time. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Emma. I can see your hands raised. And for others, either share in the chat or reflect on what's different about this one compared to the last one.
I was just going to say, obviously, for us at CTA, that example chimes very clearly with the work that we do. Well, I will say what the video does show is that there were different ages, different demographics from seeing that video. And I think that's really important that everyone is engaged in the process. And sometimes we see consultations, as we saw before, as a tick box exercise. You know, we've spoken to the people, but you may have only spoken to the people who are prepared to speak to you. So you haven't delved deeper than the people that are prepared to speak. Sometimes the people that are prepared to speak don't always give you what you may need to make decisions for all the people. And I think running events from the video we've just seen encourages participation at different levels and enables people to write, speak, not speak, but have their presence kind of valued as part of the process. Which I think is really important. I think co-production is really complex and it's really difficult to get it right because not everyone understands what co-production is and how we can facilitate that. But I suppose my frustration is often this tick box exercise. Well, we've spoken to 1,000 people and that's fine. But that doesn't lead to anything. So actually that video, I found that quite inspiring to see people getting out of their seats, writing things down, talking to each other, you know, and that's where we see co-production is I talk to you, Mike, and you change my perspective by hearing your voice. So then I think about things in a different way. So then I come to that co-production with a different way of thinking and speaking. And then that kind of moves on between the people that are doing the discussions. So you may have come to that sort of event with a very kind of blinkered view of something, but by having that engagement in different ways, you have the opportunity to change your perspective. And that then allows the co-production to become flexible. And you may not get the result that you envisaged, because once you've heard from people, what you thought you were going to do or what you thought the challenge was actually isn't. It's something completely different, which in a consultation you just don't get, because you are the people who've written the consultation have written it with a specific purpose in mind. They know the answer they want from the consultation. So if they get that answer, then all well and good. And if they don't, it'll go on a shelf because they're not prepared to move with the answers that they've been given because it doesn't fit what they want to achieve. So yeah, I quite like that video, and I think I might take that away. So thank you for that.
It's a pleasure. And again, I've included the link in the slides, which I'll share, and the Centre for Public Impact, who do lots of interesting work. I've got a nice detailed blog about the before, during and after of that project, which can give some more context to what happened next as well. I'm going to move on in a moment. There are a few, we are going to go into breakout rooms a little later, but through your comments in this group and your comments in the chat, you're very smartly preempting everything I was going to ask you to talk about together. And I want to ensure that we have plenty of time to go through some of the nuts and bolts in our final 30 minutes of the discussions as well. Again, I think the broad lessons we can take here, and I certainly hope we can take from just a couple of examples in a brief chat about what co-production is that there is no one way co-production looks. There are potentially infinite ways it can manifest with different people in different places, in different contexts, but there will be some common values which are always present to a greater or lesser extent. And it's a spectrum, as we've stressed, so it's not a binary, you are either co-producing or you're not. Quite often you will see consultations which look like they have little bits of co-production sprinkled onto them. Sometimes you will see quite co-productive pieces of work where every now and again a decision lives exclusively with the community or exclusively with the service provider, a bit of consultation sprinkled on top, and all of that's okay. What we're really looking at in building our co-production practice is, am I bringing the values of co-production to bear to the greatest extent that I can in the circumstances I find myself in? And if that's the brief we give ourselves, we can achieve a lot. If we ask ourselves, am I doing perfect co-production? Well, we're going to be very hard on ourselves because that's very hard to do. And I'm not even sure there's a meaningful definition of what perfect co-production would be. But am I bringing the values to bear to the greatest extent that I can in the circumstances I find myself in? There'll be nobody here who can't find something that they can improve on. I think to expand on this framework with hopefully a little more helpful theory, again, I'm going to briefly dip our toes into some ideas around complexity now. So I'll share my screen again for you just in a second. And I want us to think about when we should co-produce. To some extent, the crude and simple answer would be all the time, but it's far more nuanced than that. Firstly, and in all sincerity, my answer is really this, that in my experience often, and this is attacking a straw man, but in my experience often, the way this can be framed is we will think about public service design and delivery as, are there any opportunities for us to co-produce as part of this work? And my answer to when we should co-produce is simply to turn that question upside down. Is there a good reason we're not co-producing every aspect of this work? You might end up doing the same amount of co-production, but if you ask the latter question, you will miss no opportunity to co-produce where you should be. So for me, when should we co-produce? Look everywhere and do it whenever it's appropriate. That's the simple answer. I'm going to put some framework and nuts and bolts around that for us now before we go out into a discussion with each other though. So firstly, we can think about something which sometimes we will refer to as the pyramid of relevance, which is very grandiose, but you'll see why in a second. The way I think about this is like this. If my doorbell rang now and someone banging on the door, I'd say, I'm so sorry, everyone, I better go and see what's happening. And if I ran downstairs and opened the door and they said, hi, Mike, will you come with us right now? Welsh Government want to co-produce a new housing strategy for Wales. I might say, sounds fascinating, but I've got 30 people upstairs on a call and I'm going to go back to them, but hope it goes well. If the door's banging and I run downstairs and they say, Mike, the bulldozer's there, we're about to knock your house down. Have you got anything you'd like to share with us? I'd say, never mind those people upstairs. I'm going to talk to you right now. So the pyramid of relevance is a reality check for us, I suppose. Quite often we can find ourselves worried that no one wants to co-produce with us, or we can put lots of time and energy and cash into planning a great big community event, and then we sit in the church hall and 2 people come in and we think, well, I'm never doing that again. But we have to remember that these things take time. People aren't going to leap from being completely disempowered, disconnected from their public service providers, not feeling they can make a difference, not feeling listened to wanting to share power and responsibility at a strategic, abstract level about things which are not directly relevant to them. So meet people where they are, their personal, individual priorities. What are the decisions which immediately impact upon you, your children, your friends, your families, your street? Let's start co-producing there. It takes less trust and less commitment, but it builds the relationship. If I can talk to those people and get them to drive their bulldozers away, I might think, God, I wouldn't want that to happen to my neighbour. I'm going to join the committee who's designing the policy for my street, and we'll come up with a housing plan for our street. And then once I'm representing my street, maybe then I will be interested in joining the Welsh Government's big housing strategy, but only because I work through those levels slowly and surely, gaining power and responsibility incrementally, getting to know you and building my trust incrementally until I was ready and equipped and desired to take on that abstract strategic work. Sharing power and responsibility isn't a gift if you don't want it, it's a burden. So it has to be both parties equally up for it. Again, something I often find myself stress testing my own work with and advising others on is to say co-production under duress isn't co-production. Frog marching 50 people into the room to sit down and work with you doesn't lead to a co-productive outcome as much as 5 people who came in of their own volition. It's not a numbers game. Every person matters. We start with the tiny often group, the tiny group who want to co-produce with us, and we build out from there. And a neighbour of the pyramid of relevance is the ways in which we can see through the whole cross-section of our organisations, there is stuff we should be doing. Again, so often I hear, who's responsible for co-production in our organisation? Oh, it's John in marketing, or it's June, the engagement lead. And the answer should be everyone's responsible. It's our culture. It's the way we do things. Everyone should be able to articulate their co-production responsibility, because valuing the inherent worth of our communities is the responsibility of our public services, which makes it by proxy the responsibility of everyone who works within them. So whether it's setting the policy, designing the service, or supporting the individual, no matter who you are, no matter what your role, you will have a part to play. The higher up the ladder you go, the more responsible you are for creating the conditions, the financial conditions, the cultural conditions, but everybody has a role. Often we find that selling co-production to our communities is the easy bit. Selling it to our directors of finance and HR and our line managers can be the hard bit. But we need up, down, and across everybody to understand the collective responsibility. And it's not just about the level of decision where we can think about opportunities for co-production. It's the stage in the journey, and it's a cycle. So co-production encapsulates everything. Co-creation, that can be right back to commissioning and procurement. What should we do? What should we be doing, and who should we be doing it with? Do we make that decision for people or with them? It's design. How should we do it? Do we make that decision for people or with people? It's decision making and delivery. Now we know how we're going to do it. Let's do it. Do we do it for people or with people? And it's evaluation. Did it work? Did we decide that for people or with people? You don't have to start in one place and move all the way along. Co-evaluation, in my experience, is often where people start because there's a budget for it. It's a natural opportunity to talk people and gather their experiences. It informs the next step of commissioning in the continued cycle. Equally, co-design is a place people often start because they've secured some funding, they can give things time, there's an element of certainty, they can get all the felt pens out, it's fun. So whilst ideally in our utopia, we want to see co-production happening at every stage of every project in this cycle, it doesn't really matter where we start, but there will be opportunities to co-produce everywhere. Let's put a really crude example to this before we open it back out to our own practice. So let's say we're baking a cake. What does co-creation look like? Well, that's our commissioning stage. It's me saying, I've decided we're all going to have chocolate today, or it's me saying, what kind of cake would you like? What are people's favorite cakes? Maybe we need 2 different types of cake to keep everyone happy. We can make that decision together. Then it's co-design. So that can be me saying, okay, I'm going to go to the supermarket now and get all the bits. It could be me saying, who wants to come with me? Which shop shall we go to? Which flowers shall we buy? Which icing? What kind of sprinkles? Will it be a better experience if we make the cake together rather than if I make those decisions for us? Then it's the decision making and delivery. How many eggs? How much flour? Who's going to whisk it? Who's going to beat it? Who wants to put it in the oven? Who wants to decorate it? Is it better if I do that for people or with people? And then it's evaluation. And it could have a KPI that says success means there is no cake left at the end. And I could say, brilliant, there's no cake left, tick, successful project. Or I could define success with my community. I could speak to them. I could say, how was it for you? And they might say, well, actually, there's no cake left because it wasn't very nice and we all threw it in the bin when you weren't looking. Or they could say, look, I didn't like the cake, but I loved going to the supermarket with you, so I would do it again anyway. It wasn't about the cake. It was about making friends with people on the journey. Everyone might have a completely different definition of success, and being able to acknowledge and embrace those in a co-evaluative way could teach us so much more about how the project looks different in the future. So even with something as simple as baking a cake at the level of creation, design, delivery, and evaluation, there will be things we can do. There's a few questions coming through in the chat and I can see a hand up. So I'm going to stop sharing for the moment and I'm just going to address those and then we'll come back into things and go into a breakout room momentarily. So firstly, to your comment, Anne, yes, I will. I'll ensure that in around 5 minutes time, we move on to some of those practicalities explicitly, maybe 10 minutes time. We'll have our last 15 minutes on that. A question from you, John, is identifying important needs and issues in that cycle, or does that take us to deficits rather than assets? Personally, I would argue that identifying important needs and issues would live at that sort of co-creation stage, though I don't want to sort of get bogged down in over-analysing these things. I don't think it takes us to a deficit place at all. I think often acknowledging and talking about challenges is a critical part of the process. It's just about making sure we utilize our strengths and our assets to build on the solutions. But acknowledging and talking is absolutely lives there, and identifying those needs and issues. That's about that idea and project generation. What is it that we should be working on? Sian, I'll come to your comment. I'll come to you now, and then we'll come back to some of these things in the chat.
Yeah, it kind of builds a little bit on the point that Anne made. I was aware throughout that I was noticing, firstly, somebody is asking questions. Somebody is saying, would it be better if we did this, that, and the other? So there's somebody almost kind of in control, even though everybody's input is probably valued equally. There is still somebody who's deciding what questions to ask. But yeah, that's kind of it. And I just seem, I'm thinking about the value of remembering at all times that this is, co-production itself is a spectrum maybe, where you might have different kinds of co-production. So for me, so I'm a politician and I want co-production to happen because I want everybody to be around the table where we decide what's going to happen, basically, what's going to happen. But of course, there will be parameters that are already set. If a local authority is bringing the people of its region on board to say, what should social services look like? What should transport look like? They're still defining what the issue is to be addressed, social services and transport. And I think that's okay. My ultimate goal, if somebody asked me in 5-10 years' time, was that a success? I'd measure it by how much people that had been involved in that process were now going out and doing it independently in their own communities without needing anybody to set the parameters, because they'd had that experience of being involved in this co-productive process. So I think people that are involved in citizens' assemblies, one of the things they repeatedly say afterwards, across the board, across the world, is this is the way to do things. This needs to be the way that things are decided and done. And I just hope that those people, having had a taste of it, can go out into their communities and do it themselves. And when I hold these community discussions, community assemblies myself, that's what I'm hoping for. Ultimately, it's not about whether we resolve this issue or not. It's actually about how fruitful and meaningful was that experience to people, and how much would it inspire them to then go and do more of it and recruit other people to be involved in it and spread the word.
Thank you, Sian. If I may, Anne, I'm going to address your question from the comments now, because it feels relevant and builds on what Sian was saying too. So firstly, as you mentioned, how do we do it? And you said there as well, following up, there's always an issue with who decides it should be a cake rather than a fruit salad. And I want to give you just a real example of how I've spent the first half of my week. So on Monday and Tuesday this week, I've been working from Newborough in Anglesey, supporting Natural Resources Wales, who are developing their people plan for Newborough, which in a nutshell is the plan which says how we'll make sure all of those people who live and work and run businesses and invest here can have an equitable experience which respects one another's rights and respects the environment and protects the environment. There are lots of things that team in Natural Resources Wales suspect their people plan is going to have to address. But what we were doing this week was simply advertising locally, flyers in the chip shop, emails to people, things in the local Facebook group. The forestry team are all going to be in the village this week. We're going to be working from the village hall. If you want to come in and have a cup of tea with us, come in and have a cup of tea with us. There was no agenda. There were no things you had to talk to us about. There was no forms to fill in. And some people came in and just chewed the fat, whittled away a few hours. And it was great because we got to know them and we heard about their lives. Other people came in and they said, we've made some notes of some things we're worried about. Other people came in and wanted to know how they could get more involved in the future. But it was just an agendaless presence in the community to say, we just want to get to know you and we want you to get to know us. We've got biscuits, we've got tea, and you can talk about whatever you want. And over 2 days, and they're still there today, they're there all week. Over 2 days, I started to get a good nuanced sense of some of the issues that community wanted us to carry forward and build projects, co-production opportunities around. So the villagers were really worried about congestion on a particular street and the risks it posed to pedestrians. We heard it from every single person who came in. We didn't ask about it, we simply heard about it. So we now know that there will be an opportunity to co-produce. How do we solve the congestion issues on Church Street in Newborough Village? And that's how we know it's a cake, not a fruit salad in that case, because we started with that listening exercise. And that's the investment of time it takes. The way we made that palatable to them as an organisation was to say, this isn't a consultation event where if nobody shows up, it's a failure. It's you working from the village hall. If nobody comes in, you'll get loads of work done. And if lots of people come in, you'll get even more work done. So it's a win-win situation of being physically present, saying we're committed to this place, we're committed to you, we want to get to know you, the door is wide open, come in and chat to us. And 3 months from now, that will allow us to come back to you with better questions and we'll start to work on solutions together. So the secret is that physical presence and the time. They're giving themselves 18 months to write this plan. You could probably rattle a plan off in a weekend if you really needed to, but 18 months is how long it takes for people to write it together with a shared sense of ownership and real relationships. So that's a real example of how this has looked for me in my day job this week. I want to share just one more idea briefly, and then we'll have a conversation together, and then we'll look through some more practical examples for all the time we have left. So a single slide to do with complexity. A single slide can't do complexity justice, but just something to reflect on before we go into a breakout room. Not only can we think of when we should co-produce in terms of different levels at which we can engage with people, meeting them where they are. Not only can we think of it in terms of different cycles on the design and delivery and evaluation of a specific work stream, but we can think a bit about the nature of the challenges that we work with as well. And the Cynefin framework, which again is linked to in the slides here, identifies the simple, the complicated, the chaotic and the complex. And that to me feels a useful framework for us here. So some problems are simple. There's a picture of an abacus there because it might be like doing long multiplication. We all did it in school. There's a documented process. There are tools and techniques. As long as you know the formula, you will get the right answer every time. It's the realm of best practice. How do you work out what 73 times 46 is? Well, you always do it this way. And if you always do it that way, it will always give you the same result. There are then problems which we could call complicated. They're really just lots of simple problems stuck together. So that's why there's a picture of building a rocket. Rocket science is really just lots of GCSE maths in a row. But it takes some training to get your head around it. So if you want to build a rocket, there's still a documented process. There might be some specific skills you need now, but it's as linear and it's as predictable. If every principle is followed, the rocket will take off in exactly the same way every time. So if our challenges are complicated, we call in the experts, the specialists with the right training, the right expertise, the right knowledge to follow the right best practice to give us the right result. Complex situations are more like raising a child. So you can speak to all the other parents, you can speak to the teachers, you can read all the books, you can watch all the documentaries, you can know all the theory. But when your 4-year-old wants to have a meltdown in Morrison's, you're on your own and you've got to think on your feet. That expertise only helps you so much. How do you resolve that? You look at the situation in front of you, you work together. You compromise and they compromise. You invent a bespoke solution in the moment. And the next week, when they have a different meltdown in Morrison's, you'll need an entirely new solution, which seems completely different to the last one. You will learn, you will always develop, you will always iterate, but the two circumstances will never be quite the same. So there's no absolute documented process. There's no absolute definitive answer. It's what the Cynefin framework defines as a networked adaptive system. Everything's connected to everything else. Everything's contingent on everything else. The system never stops changing. So no amount of expertise can ever help us alone because this is not a static situation. If that resonates with what your work feels like, you're working in complexity, and the answer is that we have to gather the people. There is good practice that we can take inspiration from, but there is no best practice because there is no one solution. We're the first people who've ever had to do exactly this. So how are we going to find out? We're going to acknowledge that. We're going to share responsibility. We're going to figure this out together, and we're going to learn as we go. The chaotic for completion is maybe the first few weeks of COVID. There doesn't seem to be any path, any pattern. We're adapting and responding until eventually the chaotic falls into being simple or complicated or complex. So is our work complex? If nobody's done it before, if somebody's done it but never in this context, if we're working with unknown unknowns, and if there is high value but also risk, then yes, we're working in complexity. And that means there's good reason for us to think about co-production. So a reflection question for 5 minutes to give you all a break from me before we start bringing some of these threads together. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms for 5 minutes and ask, where do you have a new opportunity to co-produce? So think about your own work in your own context. You may be doing no co-production whatsoever. You may be doing huge amounts of co-production. I'd simply like you to reflect on where is there a new and additional opportunity to be co-producing where you're not at the moment. You'll have about 4 colleagues in each room. I'll bring you all back just after 10 to 12, and then we'll start bringing all of these threads together. So I'll pause our recording. Welcome back, everybody. I appreciate 5 minutes is not very long. Would anyone, if you would like to, be happy to share any of those opportunities into the chat? And again, I'll read some out as they're coming through. I will also, for your reference, Anne, and for everybody else's reference too, in answer to your question about co-evaluation, just when you were all talking, the blog I've shared a link with, well, I'll share it here one moment. I'm sharing a link to a blog here, which is the most succinct I've ever been, I think, around co-evaluation and the simple ways to apply it. and it connects to some wider reading too. So I'd say for anyone with a general interest in co-evaluation, that's a really good primer and way in. And again, I'll just read some of these out loud for the benefit of those watching the recording. So, and opportunities for border between engagement and co-production. And lack of funds to support co-production methods. And again, just as these are coming through, just some reflections from me. I think you're right in that quite often some of the broader methodologies one would associate with co-production, a most significant change evaluation approach, and big open space events, citizens' juries, do take time and money to deliver. But the starting points of making sure that we create a bit of time to listen to people, smile, don't forget to offer them a biscuit, humanizing and softening our services, that stuff actually doesn't need to cost much at all. And it goes back to that point from earlier. How can we bring those values to bear with the circumstances we find ourselves in to the greatest extent that we can? Not how can we leap to the perfect, which I think often it's helpful to think of co-production as a journey as much as a destination. Keep bringing the values to bear and the service will continue to improve. To answer that question there, Ellie, which is coming through, would you call a public meeting you wish people, what would you call a public meeting you wish people to attend? I guess co-production event is not clear to people. You're quite right. I don't really get hung up on the language. It's helpful for us to have a vocabulary and a framework to work within. I'm always a pragmatist in the sense of call it what it needs to be called to get people into the room. Sometimes that's issue related, and so the issue takes precedence. Often I'm led by the partners and by the community themselves, and often it's very much a do what it says on the tin. In Newborough this week, it was very much come in and have a cup of tea. I don't think the event had a name as such, but the advertising said this is where we'll be and this is what you can expect if you come in. It's giving people a clear information on what they can expect to experience rather than confusing them with the jargon. And you're quite right, co-production is what it is, but it's not what we have to call it. Call it whatever we need to. Wendy, you're quite right about the time it takes to co-produce because of the time it takes to form meaningful relationships. And that can be a real strain when it comes to the demands of delivery. It goes back to that earlier slide about why it's so critical to have buy-in from the top down, chief executive down, trustees down, because if the time is not acknowledged, which it takes to do this, if there is a short-termism, which we are being pressured to deliver within, you will never get sustainable co-production. There are things we can do within our limited power, but the long-term lasting meaningful changes come and we are given the time it takes to make the difference. It's why we have to sell up as well as down. Just a final couple of parting thoughts from me, if I may, and then I'll hand back to Amy to bring things to a close for us. A couple of thoughts with regards to the why, and hopefully that's becoming a little clearer as we've gone on today. So I'll share my slides for a final time. And why should we co-produce? Well, firstly, I mentioned earlier, involvement. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, for any of us operating in Wales, gives us this legal duty for all those who fall under the Act to involve people in our work. And what does that mean? This is taken from the Journey Tracker from the Commissioner's Office website. Involvement requires organisations to be open to influence from citizens and stakeholders, to move from a culture of work to moving to a culture of working with rather than doing to. In contrast to consultation, involvement approaches work with people at earlier stages, helping to identify issues, what we call co-creation, and potential solutions, what we call co-design, being supported to remain involved throughout design, implementation, and valuation processes. For me, that looks a lot like co-production. And we have that legal framework there to support us through co-producing in our work. Why? Well, it also costs money, saves money, I should say. I mean, very, very crudely, the business case for co-production is that it's cheaper to run an effective service than an ineffective service. The quote here is taken from the New Economics Foundation. Public services can be more cost effective once they are built around co-production, because co-produced services work better. They'll be cost effective, not because they cost less, though they might, but because they produce more effective outcomes, because they insulate people against ill health, or they help people to achieve better outcomes than most services currently do. A service which delivers better outcomes more of the time is more cost effective than a service which may look efficient on the surface, but delivers short-term and ineffective outcomes in reality. And the New Economics Foundation's document, The Challenge of Co-Production, provides lots of detailed case studies in that space. Here's just one by way of an example from the States, actually. The Nurse Family Partnership programs in the States have had a 15-year evaluation, one of the more longitudinal studies of co-production anywhere. They've been found to reduce child abuse and neglect by 48%, arrests of children as teenagers by 61%, incorrigible behaviour by 90%. It translates to benefits worth 5 times the investment and a saving in public spending of $41,000 per child. Again, the link which you'll see in the slides I will share provides similar examples from the UK and overseas. There is still emergent research and more research needed into the business case, as it were, for co-production. But the evidence is strong that co-produced services are better and better services are more cost effective. And last but not least, a final quote. This is from Edgar Kahn again, who I opened the session with, talking about the first time he presented his ideas around co-production publicly. He said, "I was angry about how a throwaway society treats throwaway people, or treats people as throwaway objects. It wasn't logic that drove me, it was outrage. This was how I came to identify and understand the missing element behind the co-production inquiry. It was a simple matter of social justice." And so it comes back to those simple things to end the session today. The reason we're hanged to our kids isn't because it's cost effective, hopefully. It's not because we have a legal obligation to be. If somebody said to you, "I'm going to pay you a great compliment now, you're a legally compliant parent," I'm not sure you'd take that as a great compliment. But if someone said, "I'm going to pay you a compliment now, you're a brilliant, caring, compassionate parent," you would take that as a compliment. In public service, we should be legally compliant, we should abide by the Wellbeing Act, but we should be brilliant, compassionate, caring public services. We should understand that the battle against social injustice, the right of everyone to be respected and valued, is what our work is about. And co-production is simply the nuts and bolts that can put that right. So yes, there's a legal imperative. Yes, there's a business case, but it's that moral imperative which really drives and sits at the heart of co-production. Most commonly, when I speak to people and say, "Why do you co-produce?" they say, "Well, it feels like the right thing to do." And that is the answer. So I'm going to hand back over to you now, Amy. I know I've ticked just over 12, a couple of minutes longer than I promised to. I sincerely hope that, although it's been brief today, it's been a helpful introduction. I'm going to share my email address into the chat, and I'm always happy to take questions and keep the conversation going. And equally, I'll stick around at the end now. So if anyone does want to ask something they haven't had the opportunity to, I'll stay on the line for another 10 or 15 minutes. But I'll hand over to you there, Amy. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. That was a whistle-stop tour. It was quite a whirlwind, but fantastic. It was really, really passionate delivered, and I think everyone's taken a lot of really good stuff away. I will be sending around the slides, any other resources that have been mentioned, a feedback form. And actually, I'm thinking that if people are interested, there could be space for Think to convene something akin to a working group for anybody who works in transport and health to keep working on this, because you can join the Co-Production Wales network, which I very much advocate you do. I'm a member myself, but also we could have a working group within, so to keep us going as a team, because building that idea of building trust, learning from each other. It might be that we can find ways to do that kind of upward persuasion of getting things at a strategic level and help each other to do that, as well as, you know, one of the reasons I convened this today was for I benefited from the training, I wanted you benefit from the training, and that's what a network's about, isn't it? So how we can kind of spread the word and play with ideas. We've also got the second round of the £2,000 grants that Think gives out for tackling transport issues in the community. That might be something that is really worth some of you applying for, to try out some of these ideas around co-production. You know, paying for all the cake and tea can get pricey. So that's something to think about as well. And for some of you, I know you're not already members of Think, you've heard about this through something else. So I have put the link in the chat for anybody who wants to sign up more formally. It's free. It just means you get the newsletter and regular contact from us so you know what's going on. That's it. I don't want to keep you any longer. Thank you so much for your time. Do get in touch with me at think@aber.ac.uk or my email address, which you'll have from me emailing you. If you've got any ideas how to take this forward as well. My first idea is the working group, but there could be other really brilliant ideas. And I love in my little breakout group, we've already got a little idea going on between some of the people, and that's what the Think Network's about. So please keep working together. And for the benefits of us as being a funded project, if you do have fantastic ideas that come out of this training, just let us know. Even if we're not remotely involved after this point, it just helps to show the value of having a network like this be paid for, because there's no other means for you to work together in this way. So thanks again, Mike. I'll let you guys ask him any other questions in case you've got them. So thank you, everybody, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks, Amy, and thank you very much, everyone. Diolch.
Hi, Mike. I've got a question.
Great.
Is it okay to ask? Sorry, I couldn't see how to raise my hand. In terms of inclusion and making these sessions kind of inclusive and accessible, I'm always wondering, is there any value